Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Rising Tide Talk. I'm Matt, Roleplay Chat Capelli, and today we're going to be talking about building a sustainable TTRPG career. I'm extremely eager and excited to be talking to a returning guest on RT Talks. She is a storyteller, a content strategist, a writer with credits in the Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, among many other things, and the director and founder of the Storytelling Collective. Please join me and hype up in chat Ashley Warren to the Rising Tide community. Hi, Ashley. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so glad I get to be back. I just love this community. I love everything that goes on here. So yeah, it's a big privilege to be here.
We love you right back. We're super happy to have you back. Your advice last time was fantastic, and that's why we're going to ask you the hard questions today. We're going to ask you
All
all the
right,
hard.
I'm ready.
So the plan is to kind of go over three main categories of questions today, Ashley, and it's mostly inspired by questions that the community asked us ahead of time. But if during our conversation today, folks, there's stuff that comes up and you want to see, get an answer to something that's burning deep in your heart of hearts, there's going to be a thread that you can post that in. So just above this one in the Discord, there's a RT Talks discussion forum. And there should be one for today's conversation. If questions come up and you want them answered, post them there, and I'll try to save, the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes to do that. Other than that, like I said, there's going to be some main pillars of our conversation today. So I'm going to try to split it into three parts. The first is just kind of definitions, lay the foundation of what we're talking about. Then we're going to move on to talking about sustainability from a financial perspective. So trying to bake in a career that is financially sustainable. And then last but not least, we're going to be talking about the best practices to kind of maintain a balance as far as mental health and sustainability kind of in that world. So two really big subgroups of this. Hopefully we have time to cover it all. And if we don't, we can continue the conversation in the Discord server, of course. All right. I've been talking a lot. I'm going to pass the microphone over to you now, Ashley. When we talk about building a sustainable career in the TTRPG space, what are we dreaming up here? What are we thinking about, really?
Yeah, so for me, I've always defined this as having kind of three pillars. So I guess three is our number of the day. It really comes down to creativity, logistics, and finances. And if you can kind of address each of those pillars when you're thinking about what this looks like for you, then you're kind of touching on all the marks. And within that, there's the emotional sustainability and all those other things, but those are kind of subclasses of those. And then just to kind of break those down a little bit further, when it comes to creativity, that is a practice. And so do you feel like you can maintain your creative practice for the long term? We're thinking about the longevity of your career, the kind of big picture of it. And so creativity is a really important part of that because I always like to define creativity as problem solving. And really a creative career is pretty mentally taxing. So we want to kind of really build in, systems and processes and, and a mentality for yourself where you can do this fairly mentally taxing work for the long haul without getting burnt out. And I'm going to really avoiding burnout is really, I think, at the core of building a sustainable career. How can you meet those three pillars without burning out or, kind of falling to pieces at that expense? And then when it comes to logistics, that's your schedule, your time commitment, your bandwidth. Are the projects you're doing something that you could do at this pace for the long term, or what do you need to adjust? How much time do you have to dedicate to the things that you want to do? So a lot of logistics comes down to time and time management, but also it really fits in with creativity. How solid is your creative process at carrying you through big long-term creative projects? And then finances, which we're going to actually talk quite a bit about today, because that's a big component of this. Your career is your livelihood. And so with that comes money. How can you sustain your lifestyle and your needs through your creative career? And we're going to be talking specifically about tabletop careers today, but I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about is applicable to all creative careers. And some of the things that I'm going to actually be talking about branch slightly outside of tabletop, just because I think for a lot of folks within tabletop, we have a lot of creative interests that go beyond that. And so that might be part of your creative career, is that it's not all tabletop focused, but we will still kind of keep our conversation today focused on tabletop. So yeah, so it really comes down to those three things. Can you do those things for the long haul? And what does that mean to you? How long do you want to have a career? Even just like making something sustainable, is that like 10 years? Is that 2 years? Is this indefinite? Like, do you just plan to never retire? I don't necessarily advise that, but I understand that that's the reality for a lot of us millennials, is that, retirement is just like this elusive concept. So, yeah, so those are just the things that I usually recommend people thinking about when this topic comes up.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. I really like how you kind of touched on, a lot of these things that I think at first glance we think of sustainability and maybe we kind of pigeonhole ourselves into kind of one dimension of that. And so it's super important really that we're talking about sustainability in a sleuth of areas and they kind of feed into each other. One thing too that I think you touched on that I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper before we move on to the finance stuff is kind of how what we define as sustainable can change. Because as our life changes, I think our perspective on what sustainability means will change as well.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know maybe in your career or in your experiences, what kind of outside factors have influenced how you perceive sustainability in your career?
Yes, that's such an important point. And kind of like, this is actually relevant to when I was last here talking about the creative process. Like, a level of flexibility always needs to be like factored into these plans, and understanding that this will change, and what sustainability looked like for you a few years ago might be very different now. And Matt, before this, we were both talking about our kids. So for me, that's been a big factor in how my view on what my sustainable career looks like has changed pretty drastically. I feel like I consider my creative career to be about a 15-year span. That's like just how long I've really considered myself to be like seriously and professionally doing the work that I'm doing. I'm in my mid 30s, so I feel like I use that kind of as like my personal metric. And over those 15 years, like a lot has changed for me in my life. So how I used to view that early on in my career, really at the time, that how I would have defined that is basically like having a full-time salaried job at a company was how I kind of defined a sustainable career, like a creative career, like, working for some sort of creative entity, like as a writer or, whatever. Now I'm like opposite. Like for me, my sustainable career is things that I do like myself. Like it's not that I would never work for a company again, but like I just feel like my view on sustainability is flexibility. It's having like my company be something that I run and kind of can manage and control. And so like I don't view like my career as being linked to like a specific job at a specific place. So I just say that because that has like my mentality on that has changed so much just in the last like 15 years, and largely because, like I mentioned, I'm a parent. I was recently a caregiver for an older family member, and those meant that I needed to change my priorities. I needed to have some financial security that was different than what it used to mean for me. When you have a child, you kind of have to like take them to the doctor. My daughter has gone to the doctor a lot because she's in preschool. So we're sick all the time. And so like, having really good insurance is a necessity for me now. Not that it wasn't before, but I was a little bit more flexible on what that could be, how I was insured before. So that has changed, how I set my financial goals and how I've structured my business, how I set my daily hours. So yeah, so that's changed a lot for me. And it really it's always dependent on what your real life looks like. And although you can't anticipate what's going to happen in the future, I do think having some foresight, like if you do plan to start a family, or you might become a caregiver for a family member in the future, or you might move because your spouse gets a job somewhere else. Like there's some things that you can kind of start to maybe put into your plans as like, these are things that might happen in the future. How can I make sure that my career wouldn't be completely like derailed or deprioritized because of those things? I did some of that before my husband and I decided to start our family. Like I did think really like consciously about how I wanted to adjust my career, my goals, my schedule. Of course, a lot of things you only figure this out once you actually have your child. So a lot of that was like a little naively planned, but it did kind of help me to know that those were some like life things that I had on the agenda. But yeah, it will absolutely change. And it really can only be based off of your current circumstances and what you feel like is kind of within your realm of ability and control. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into finances.
Hmm.
And then just kind of one note is like something to think about when you're thinking about your own sustainable creative career is that a career is different than a job. Your career is like a long-term thing. It's basically your narrative arc. So I see a lot of folks, especially like new tabletop creators, they think their career will be defined by like one job. And for some, maybe that's true. Like maybe you'll just like really like get this incredible opportunity that really does define your career. It's a place that you'll be at for 15, 20 years. I would say for the majority of people though, it doesn't necessarily work like that and that's okay. So I just want to always distinguish between like a job and like a job related goal and your career. Like your career is holistic. Pretty much everything you do currently and will do is part of your career. So it's just like kind of connecting those dots and thinking about like how you want to expand upon the things that you already enjoy doing and are probably already
Hmm.
doing. But I wish someone had really told me that when I was young, a young starry-eyed, creative, someone who wanted to write and be creative, that it's not about the jobs that you have, it's about the work that you do holistically. That's what your career is. So that's kind of like that's the lens through which I'm approaching all of this today.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I think that segues really nicely, Ashley, into some of the questions that we have about financial sustainability. So why don't we shuffle on over into there? We got a question from Jenna Figures in the pre-chat before this. And Jenna asked, within the context of being a freelancer, layout artist, etc., how do you strike a balance between supporting independent products or indie projects that have a much lower budget than perhaps some of these bigger companies that have a different budget and might be able to pay you better, but under other circumstances that perhaps you as a creator, you would rather be supporting smaller projects or smaller groups. Anyway, how do you balance that in the lens of sustainability, kind of like you're saying, with this perspective of it's my whole career, not just this one job?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a balance. Anytime you say yes to something, you're kind of inherently saying no to something else. And because time is really, is finite for all of us, not to sound morbid, but it is. And so I do think that those decisions, especially early on in your career, they feel really daunting because I think, as early career creatives, a common trajectory is like, okay, you start to kind of put work out, then you start to get opportunities. Then, if those go well, you get more opportunities and things kind of snowball in usually a positive way. But you kind of get to a point where then you're
Mm.
overcommitted. And then, it's like I see a lot of people get on this burnout cycle. And I speak from experience. I've been there more times than I can count. Finally, kind of starting to break those cycles, even though it's like I'm very aware of like how these cycles work. And I still find myself in that. So I would say that there's a few years ago, I was talking to my friend Sadie Lowry, who many people up here might know. She's a very prominent tabletop creative. And she was kind of on that same trajectory. And so we talked about creating a rubric for yourself and your rubric for what projects you say yes to. And I think this actually fits really well into your sustainable career because I think you should have a rubric for the things that you do,
Mhm.
the jobs that you accept, the opportunities you seek, the people you work with, etc. But basically the rubric touched on different points. One was like, what is the financial benefit for me here? If there isn't a financial benefit or like you're not getting paid a lot, then it needs to check a lot of other boxes to be a good opportunity for you. It needs to it needs to be like a concept and a project that like really lights your fire. It needs to be with people that you really want to work with. And like it needs to be a project that is going to actually come to fruition so you don't feel like you're sinking your time into something that's never really going to see the light of day, unless it's just like a totally personal hobby project. And it needs to really check these boxes. And it doesn't, a project doesn't have to check all the boxes to be something that you say yes to, but that measuring system will help you figure out your gut reaction
Yeah.
to it. It'll help you figure out what that means for you because I think that instinct isn't always super like strong when you're early on. You get an opportunity, you want to say yes because you're afraid if you don't say yes, it's going to go away forever. So I say that because like you want to kind of measure how beneficial a project's going to be for you. And sometimes the indie project is the right call, even if it's not a huge monetary benefit. You might meet someone there that you really jive with, and then that can be a collaborator that you work with long term. Maybe you start a business with that person or you do a lot of projects with them. So it's not always about money. I will say though, a project should never really require you to, like, if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of money to spend, you shouldn't necessarily be like going broke over projects, even, for great indie projects. Like, you still have to set reasonable
Mhm.
budgets for yourself. No one should be burning out or going broke over these things. And I think, unfortunately, I've seen that happen time and time again in the tabletop community. And that also includes your time. You should not be over investing your time if you don't really have it yet, because your time is super, super valuable. And when it comes to finances, I know there's like this eye rolling, phrase like time is money, but it really is when it comes to creative work, because that's how a lot of our projects are measured, is by how much time is spent working on them. So there is a monetary factor there. So I would say like maybe factor that into your plans. Like, I want to support like one indie project every quarter. And then that's the one that you can do. And then the other projects, it's okay to seek out ones that are a little bit more maybe financially beneficial for you. Like, it's okay. I just want to say, like, it's okay to want to make money.
Yeah.
Like, I understand we live in a capitalistic society, and it feels, the money conversations that I see in creative communities, like, we all like don't want to talk about it. It feels weird. We feel like we're like, feeding into this like this system, and we're all like cogs in the wheel. Like, look, I get it. And actually, a big part of sustainable career building is acknowledging some of the issues in our industries right now. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this topic is because, like, we've seen a lot of turbulence in the tabletop community over the past couple of years. There's been lots of layoffs and companies making weird corporate decisions that don't necessarily benefit the communities around them. This is happening in video gaming. We're seeing this in traditional publishing. So really, I feel like a lot of the industries that a lot of us want to like enter and really make a home for ourselves have felt rocky. So I say that because we need to be having these conversations about money more transparently. I think it's how we build more equitable, sustainable careers for all of us. And at the end of the day, there's only kind of so much that we can do as individuals. Some of this is like holding these companies accountable. So just to kind of go back to Jenna's question about the balance here, like it's okay to make pay a factor in your decision there. And you don't necessarily have to do work for, like as a volunteer, unless it's something that really speaks to your values and it's something you want to do. It's okay to like prioritize the things that you'll see an ROI over return on investment, which I know sounds super buzzwordy. I sound like a corpo in a suit. I know. But these are things you have to think of if you want to have a sustainable creative career, which includes finances. There's a reason that's a pillar of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good of you to say that, because you're right. Like, in a perfect world, we would be supporting the projects that 100% check off all the boxes. But first of all, you're not going to know if it does if you don't build the rubric. So I think that that's a really solid piece of advice, is start by building some kind of rubric like that, and then being able to flex back and forth between them if you have the opportunity to do so, I think is really solid advice.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of fees and things like that, we had another question, this one from Chris Hopper. And Chris asks if you had any advice or recommendations on how to set your fees and kind of plan, quote unquote, your required output, so that you can kind of turn those fees and rates into a salary equivalent, so you can almost kind of predict that year in out or every quarter or what have you. So I'd be curious to know if you have any recommendations on kind of setting your rate based on an annual amount that perhaps you're trying to achieve.
This is a really good question. There's also so many components to this. So I need to figure out how to break this down. And also, hi, Chris. I recognize your name and your question. So thanks for your question. So, okay, one thing is that like we're kind of talking about sustainable careers as like freelancers or people who basically kind of run your own business here. And there's a difference there too. So like, and I say this as someone who's done both. Like now, like I don't know, I straddle the line between being a contractor, but I also run a business, but I like work entirely for myself. And so I say that because like I understand the complexity of like freelancing. I will say, just as a general note, if you plan to make your sustainable career something that you do on your own, whether you want to freelance write or, do other kind of like contract work, I would recommend getting established as a business entity. You can be a sole proprietorship. And this is probably specific to the US, but wherever you live, like consider like setting yourself up at the basic level of a business. I think not only is it like logistically easier for you for managing your money and your finances, but also I think mentality wise, it makes you feel really legit. So I think it's something that I really recommend everyone looking into if you haven't already. Even if all you do is like maybe plan to contribute to like, I don't know, some drive through RPG anthologies or things like that. If you plan to make money at any level, really look into just like how you can have the basic level business structure. I really just can't recommend that enough. It's really helpful for you. You'll get some benefits that way, and it's good for you. So I say that because when you're thinking about like your monetary goals, that's kind of part of it.
Hmm.
And something I want you all to think about is like, what kind of creative work do you want to do? If you want to have a full-time sustainable creative career in tabletop, does that mean you want to be a full-time narrative designer, game designer? Do you want to do layout? Do you want to, do cover design or art? Like, because what that means is different for everyone. And also I say that because the rates are different for all of that. So your salary and your income is going to look very different depending on that. Personally, I think the more you can diversify your revenue streams as an independent creator, like the better.
Hmm.
That's always been my bread and butter. It's something I believe really strongly in. Also, I don't, as much as I love to write, like writing is not the only thing that I love to do. So I knew that I wouldn't be happy being a full-time writer. So my personal career is made up of a few different components. So you can set your fees based off of the kind of work that you're doing. And if you have more than one thing that you want to do, then you set your rates accordingly, which I know is not a very specific answer, but it really is relative to what you want to do. One thing is I would research industry rates for like how much what's the average for getting paid, for writing tabletop. Again, are you writing adventures? Are you working on a full book? Are you working on a team? Is this something you're doing entirely on your own? All those will change how you get paid. And then also, like, you can set a monetary goal. Like, for example, if your goal is to leave, if you're working a full-time job and it's something you want to leave to do tabletop full-time and you want to use your current salary as a benchmark, I think that's usually a good place to start. It really depends on what industry you're leaving because unfortunately, freelancing and tabletop can be a bit of a grind to meet salary
Hmm.
levels unless you are full-time staff at a company. I do not say that to discourage you. I think that you can absolutely make bank if you're strategic about it. But usually that means doing more than just writing. So if we're talking about writing, like usually you'll get paid, it's usually like a per word rate. And I think it's like, I mean, it's low, y'all. It's like 20 cents per word. And I think that was even when I worked for, Wizards of the Coast and stuff like, and I think that's pretty, I don't think I'm breaking any NDA by sharing that. And also it very well could have changed since I did that. So don't necessarily take that as like, that's what it still is. But I think of all the books I worked on and those were not enough. Like those were not salary equivalent for me. So I've always supplemented with other types of work. That's just where I'm also happiest. So I would say like set a salary. You can use your existing one to kind of use that as a benchmark with the understanding that you might not be meeting that yet, but it can help you break down like, how do I currently make that much money? Like if I run the numbers, like how many projects would I have to do at the kind of industry rates to meet that,
Hmm.
which honestly probably would not be very sustainable. You'd probably have to be cranking out a lot of work. And also just finding that many opportunities might be a bit tricky. There's actually a lot of writing opportunities available in tabletop and a lot of editing and layout. There's a lot of work to be found, but you're not necessarily making huge paychecks from those projects. So what people end up doing is just taking on a lot of work, like a large volume of work, which for some people is really doable. I did that early on, but I could do that then and I cannot do that now. Now I always have to have like an anchor project. And just for those who might not know what that means, it's like when you're freelancing, if you have like an anchor client that they kind of make up the bulk of your compensation, like it's like a company that you would be working with a lot. You'd get like really regular work. And so for me, I always have like an anchor project and then like everything that I make through Storytelling Collective and the other things that I do. To kind of long-windedly answer your question, Chris, start with a number, set a number that you think is reasonable, work backwards from there, run some equations, see how much work you would have to produce, and then also think about what are other ways that you could make some money in tabletop. Like if you do know, if you have InDesign and you're good at it, like that's another thing you could add as a revenue stream that might, it might not be full-time writing, but it's still creative, it's still tabletop related, and it could still help you meet your goal until you can maybe kind of like tip the scales a little bit where you are doing a little bit more writing. So that's unfortunately kind of a vague answer. I wish I had more kind of like recent data on industry rates. It's kind of hard to find this information specific to tabletop,
Mhm.
and every company is different. But my understanding is for a long time, it was like 10 to 20 cents per word, which is not a lot.
Yeah, I think that's what I remember too. If I'm not mistaken, someone at some point in this Discord did like a compilation of various rates that they had found for a lot of the major public, the big players in the space. Maybe we can try to dig it up and highlight it again. So I'll try to remember to to do that after the chat is done. But I think what you're saying, Ashley, about setting a number and then working backwards just to see how many freelance gigs you would need to do to kind of match that is going to be a really good way of determining whether or not it's sustainable for you in your current stage of life, or if maybe you need to make some kind of compromises about the kind of work you're doing. Like you're
Mhm.
saying, maybe you should flex into a different space or try to dabble a little bit everywhere until you can find one of these anchor clients, perhaps, if you don't already have one. And then that hopefully makes it a little bit easier for you because you can have that
Mhm.
steady stream. Let's go maybe with one more question about finances before we move on to talking more about like balance and mental health. This one is a bit of a big one, Ashley. So, dive deep where you feel it's the easiest for you. But we got a couple of questions that kind of related to different tools for things like
Mhm.
insurance, saving for retirement, filing your taxes, all that kind of stuff, like all of that more financial logistics that you might need to do. And some of those questions came from AlphaStream or from Jay. So I'm wondering if you had some tools or software or advice that you might have for people who are perhaps working independently. Maybe they're working part-time. I know a lot of folks in the
Mhm.
community work part-time in the TTRPG space, and then they have their like quote
Mhm.
unquote day job that helps supplement their finances. So any kind of advice on, filing your taxes and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like, honestly, the good news is that there are so many awesome tools to run your own creative business these days. Like, it really is an exciting time. I think it can be discouraging to look at the industry and see, like, all these layoffs and all these things. But there's so many platforms where you can publish your work, and there's so many tools that are available for helping you run your business. And I love like I love trying out new tools and systems. It's just like I find that a really satisfying part of running my own business in this space. And so a couple of things that I like to use. So another benefit of having setting yourself up as a business is that you get access to business bank accounts. I use a platform called Novo, Novo, and it's just a place that's where all my business income goes from all of my different revenue streams goes right into my Novo account. And from there, I can do payroll. I actually still use PayPal for Stoco payroll because my whole team, they're basically like contractors rather than employees. So that's like, that's a whole thing that you have to think about is like, if you want to start a company where you're hiring people, there's different like ways that you can do that and bring people on board. That's like a topic for another day. But I really like Novo, and there's all sorts of other ones. I just have found that to be like, it's super user friendly. It connects to lots of different thing. So like it connects to our learning platform. So when people take our classes, like it's just money just goes all into one place. I have reserves
Cool.
set for like my team pay, any other people that we contract for our programs, like everything's just really nicely organized. I have used QuickBooks self-employed for quite a few years, but actually Novo now has that built in, so I'll probably be switching to that. But QuickBooks self-employed is just awesome. It basically just like itemizes all of your income and like tags it accordingly. And then when you need to file your taxes, it's all like really easy to like organize and see. Definitely recommend, make sure that you understand how to pay quarterly taxes and, like develop some basic understanding of that. I know that this topic can be really like daunting and overwhelming. It doesn't have to be though. And if it's just you and you're a sole proprietor, there's not a whole lot you have to do. And also you have to be meeting certain thresholds to even have to pay taxes in the first place. But the more you know and can set yourself up from the beginning, it just makes your life so much easier. And I will say, like, I'm glad that
Mhm.
those are the things that I did early on that have just made my life easier. And it's made it easier for me to set monetary goals because I have those systems in place. But even that's, fluctuated over the years. I've tried different tools and things like that. And then for retirement, for the last few years, actually until last year when I started doing Storytelling Collective full time last spring, I was working full time jobs and then doing things on the side. That's always been like, I think a really good compromise for a lot of people. And my day jobs have usually been creativity related in some way. My previous job, I was a content strategist. I've done a lot of marketing, which has a lot of overlap with the other things I like to do. I do a lot of marketing for Storytelling Collective, so it's actually been really helpful to have that background. But I didn't always have like, sometimes I had health insurance and sometimes I didn't at those jobs. So I would always make sure to like look into, the Affordable Care Act, in your local networks to see what you can private pay for. Now my husband has an insurance plan that I'm covered under, but that hasn't always been the case. So we've had to change that several times. But there are options for you to be insured even if you are self-employed. And like for tax software, there's free tax filing software like through the government. Like you don't have to pay a lot of money to do that. I don't know. I use a service for sending 1099s to all of our contractors at the end of every year. It's super easy. I just plug in the numbers that I've already been tracking. Google Spreadsheets rocks. I love a good spreadsheet. I think if you're gonna do this, it's good to kind of embrace the admin steps and have fun with it. I know people are like, I don't want to do like, well, but it's actually pretty satisfying to have spreadsheets and have your systems and have it's called your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, have all these things documented. A lot of folks here probably know that I love Notion, which is just like a project management tool, but it's really customizable. Our team uses that at Storytelling Collective. I use it for my personal stuff, but I set financial goals for myself in there and then I just keep things updated. It's really cool to see the numbers change. You hopefully increase. Sometimes they don't always increase, but on a good month they increase. So I think the more you can be organized and make sure that you have kind of like your basic business stuff set up, the better you'll be. And it's just so much easier to meet goals and make goals. And I love to just see all of my different income streams going into my one bank account. And then from there, you can take like an owner's draw. Oftentimes I just kind of let it build. I take like a small income from that. But yeah, I think your toolkit is so important. So I think as long as you have like a business bank account, a very basic business license, so it's going to be unique to your state and your location. For retirement, I use a service called Betterment where I just like contribute to my own retirement. Because again, I've had different jobs. Some offered retirement matching and some didn't. So I have a 401k and I have an IRA and I just contribute to it every month. And it's totally just something that I can just manage on my own. There's lots of services that do that. Like there's just like tons of like personal wealth services these days.
Mhm.
There's a platform I like called Ellevest, ELLEVEST. It's actually it's directed toward women, but it's really for anyone. But it's just like to help women be like financially empowered, and it's like an investment platform. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to like list all my stuff at some point in the Discord at a later date. But yeah, having your
Cool.
toolkit is
Yeah.
like so important, and a lot of them are free, so you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money on these tools either.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And I think, yeah, having a solid toolkit to support you in doing what you need to do to be sustainable financially is super, super important. I would even rewind a bit and say that annual figure that we were talking to Chris about, if your objective is to work for the rest of your career in the TTRPG space and you want to retire, well, that, bi-weekly contribution to your retirement fund should be factored into that annual figure so that you can work backwards. Same thing with whatever private insurance costs you might have or software that you might require.
Mhm.
So yeah, okay, cool. I think that covers some of the big heavy hitters as far as being financially sustainable goes. Now let's talk a little bit about best practices to find balance in our career. I think that that's definitely something that unfortunately sometimes tends to go at odds with the financial pillar, right? Like you see all these freelance gigs coming in and you want to meet your financial goals, so you might overextend. So
Mhm.
I'd be curious to know kind of your experience managing that scale and kind of the scale of your work too, like when you just started off, what did the scale of your work look like and kind of how that evolved over time and the level of effort it took for you to make that manageable. I know that's probably a pretty loaded question, so I'm sorry.
Oh, it's such a good question. It's again, these are like things that I want us always to be talking about in creative communities. It's so important. And I think there's things that I just wish people would have told me early on that probably would have saved me a lot of burnout. So yeah, so this has been, I feel like, quite a journey for me to figure this out for myself. I've always been very much a yes person. I've always loved to be like active and contributing in communities. I've always done a lot of volunteer work and I always had lots of jobs. I was an honor student. I was just like this started for me really at a young age where I've always been a little overcommitted, frankly. And no one ever really stopped me because I think I'm good at like kind of keeping it together, but inside I'm like
Mm.
I get anxious very easily. So I say this because I think a lot of people in our community, are used to being high achievers, and it's really easy to get on this cycle of just like, yeah, overcommitting, overextending yourself. One piece of advice that I implemented in my own life that I actually kind of need to revisit, frankly, and that's again, this came up in a conversation with Sadie Lowry years ago when we were both kind of going through this, is that I try to factor in 2 evenings a week where I don't have to work on a creative project in order to meet a deadline. Now I actually think I really need even more time than that. At the time, when I set that as kind of a metric for myself, I was working a full-time job and all my tabletop work that I was doing was kind of my side hustle. I've always had a side hustle, like since I can remember my whole life. Like it's just always how I just always felt like it was never enough to just have one job. I always needed to have something on the side that really was my outlet for creativity and just like building toward what I wanted to do. And thankfully, I'm glad I did that because now it's my full-time hustle. Like Storytelling Collective is my full-time hustle. So I'm glad I did that. But at the time, that was what my schedule was. So, and I was spending my evenings and weekends writing, working on writing projects and then, running Storytelling Collective. Now I don't have my nights and weekends available to do that. I have a child. So as soon as she's home from preschool, like I can't really hole up in my
Mm.
office and work on these things. And I don't always have guaranteed bedtime, for to do that because usually I'm tired and I need to go to bed too. So I'm just not really in a stage where I can do that. So I've had to really figure out like where I'm going to do my creative work. Now it is my full-time job. So I do factor in writing days into my schedule because that is a big way that I make my money through my livelihood. So it's not something that I necessarily do in nights and weekends anymore. I do it during the day. But then I also have all the business of running Storytelling Collective that I have to do that I do also just during kind of standard business hours. So that's how I personally do that. But I understand that for a lot of people, if you are working full time, you're finding these other pockets to do so.
Mhm.
But I would say like if committing to a new project infringes on, that 2-day rule, then you're overcommitted. Like you have to have that wiggle room baked in. And even it doesn't mean you can't write during those 2 days. It just means that you shouldn't have to do that in order to meet your deadlines. If you have to crunch every free hour that you have, you're overcommitted. And also, it doesn't account for emergencies. Like a few years ago, I was like in the middle of like so many projects and so many deadlines. And then my cat needed like a big surgery right in the middle of it. And then like I just hadn't factored any sort of emergencies into my schedule. And I was just like, I was losing it. And then I've actually asked for an extension, which I rarely do. Now I'm like, I definitely will. But I didn't at the time. That just felt like failure to me, which is silly. None of what we're doing is life or death,
Mm.
people. So like, oh, it's okay to ask for extensions, by the way. But I just like, I hadn't baked that into my schedule. I didn't account for anything outside of like this very rigid schedule. So I would say like, whatever that looks like for you, it doesn't have to be the 2-day rule, but something that like has some open time baked in your schedule, that is a non-negotiable. Do not take on more work and if it infringes on that. I promise you will need that time because you might end up using that time for what you already have committed to. Like you might have a week where you need to work every night. That's fine, but you don't want to have another thing on top of that
Mhm.
that you haven't accounted for that. So at this point, like I'm really trying to not say yes to so many things. It's hard for me because I get excited about a lot of projects. I'm a compulsive like finisher. Like if I start something, I will finish it even if it kills me, which I don't really think it's not an admirable trait. I think it's important to finish your projects, but don't go overboard like I do. So I can't start something because I know that I have to see it through. So I have to be really strategic about what I say yes to. And then again, I've taken on the kind of like anchor project mentality. Like Last year, I was approached to write like a full tabletop book by a local humanities organization, and it's grant funded. And it's, it was a pretty substantial contract. And that's what I said yes to for this year. So that's been like my one anchor project. So I've had to turn down a lot of other things that have come my way because I couldn't do that and Storytelling Collective
Hmm.
and some of the other things that I already do in my life on top of that. So I think like for me, that's kind of the mentality that I take on now is like, I can say yes to like one big thing or a couple of little things as long as they meet this criteria, kind of going back to the rubric idea. So again, that looks different for everyone. But if you are someone, if you have another job, if you have other people to take care of in your life, your bandwidth is going to be different than it is for people who might not be in those stages of life. Like me 5 years ago, I was cranking out tons of work at all hours of the day because I could, and I just can't do that anymore. But I'm doing better work now, and I think I say yes to better things now because I've kind of learned
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
like actually having less time to just do that actually has made my work better. It's made the projects I pick like better quality. So there's a trade-off there, but I just come up with your own system of how you're going to say yes to things and what that will look like on an actual like day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
Cool. I'm looking at the clock and we have about 10 minutes left.
I went by fast.
And I didn't see any questions posted. So, unless I'm wrong, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to keep going with the questions that I have planned. So, I want to try to maybe like speed run through a couple of these,
Okay,
if you're comfortable with that.
let's do it.
We have a couple questions that kind of relate to being an independent creator, being a solo creator, and kind of doing everything for yourself. And be curious to know what kind of advice you have for managing sustainability in that context. And maybe also, I'll package in another question. How do you identify stuff that would be best to kind of give off to somebody else so that you can lighten your load as a solo creator?
Those are great questions. And again, this took me a while to figure out for myself. I ran the RPG Writer Workshop like pretty much by myself for the first couple of years of its existence. So, and it's only really through doing that I figured out what I didn't like to do. And I would say the stuff that you don't like to do, but that needs to be done is usually a good thing to outsource. So if you don't like to go through all of your expenses and, do like a monthly analysis of your business income, that would be something that you could easily outsource. I would say stuff that doesn't necessarily require your specific creative brain is what should be outsourced. So like in Storytelling Collective, I like to do a lot of the curriculum development and things myself because that's just what I love to do. So I don't, even though we work with instructors, I don't always want to like outsource that entire process to someone else because that's what I want to do. So I think just like through practice, like after, you've gotten started, like if there's stuff that you really dread, but that's kind of holding you back, that would be something to outsource. And then in general, like, yeah, when you're starting out, if you are an independent creator and you're starting your own little business, you are going to have to do most things yourself to start. It's not going to be like that for forever. I would say like find people you can collaborate fairly early on. I've always found a lot of great people in the tabletop community who like to do the things that I don't necessarily want to do. Even that that's on like a creative project level, like if you find someone who's an awesome layout artist and you like to do the writing and then you can kind of tag team those things or vice versa.
Yeah.
It's nice to just kind of network and see who you can find, who you can collaborate with to take some of that off your shoulders. If you don't like to do marketing, which unfortunately is just part of the game here, folks, that's something you can market. There's a lot of services, a lot of people in the tabletop industry who specialize in that. Then you can kind of pair up with those people. If you don't have a lot of money to spend on contractors and things like that, it's good to just develop your toolkit. There's a lot of free tools out there, the Google Suite, Canva, there's lots of things that will help you run a business without having to pay a lot for it and without spending a lot of time on the elements that you don't necessarily like. But you do kind of, at first, kind of have to learn how to wear lots of different hats. I think that's pretty fun and it can be pretty rewarding. And you actually might find a new venture for your business through doing that. Like I love doing like editing and I love giving people like input on their, creative processes or their business and stuff. And I didn't really know that I liked those things until I did it for myself. So you never know what it might actually unlock for you.
Yeah.
So I would say like just experiment with the process for a while. Make your toolkit with the kind of things that we've talked about, set your goals, start to actually work on the projects that align with your business goals. And then from there, if you're like, I hate, having to send out contracts to someone, every month, like then that's something you outsource. Like just keep a running list of like, these are the things that I dread doing, but that I know need to be done. And then you can kind of start finding out, services and or people from there.
Yeah.
That's kind of really, it's just a learning process though.
Definitely. And I'll do a quick plug for servers like this one, or perhaps even the Storytelling Collective, right?
Hmm.
Here in the TTRPG Rising Tide, we have chats that are dedicated to finding other people to help you in your projects, whether that be paid opportunities or, collaborations when you're just getting started off. Maybe, you do the art for me and then I'll help you write the thing later because there's a project you're thinking up but you need a writer for. You can kind of do like a job swap or what have you. So
Hmm.
definitely utilize communities like these ones for that kind of stuff. Okay, two more questions, Ashley.
Yes.
Burnout. How do you identify burnout before it happens? And how do you stop it from happening? And that one is like, we could talk about that probably. I think we already did. There is an Archie talk about burnout. So go find that.
Hmm.
But what's your, 2 cents on that, Ashley?
Yeah, I feel like this is core to your sustainable tabletop career. So have a plan for this.
Hmm.
Like really think through this. How do you burn out and how can you avoid it? I promise it's better to avoid it than to recover from it. One is to kind of do the tricks that we talked about. Like factor in time into your weekly, daily, monthly life where you do not have to create. Like you do not have to work on your creative projects. Like you have real downtime and real rest and recovery time. Like I cannot stress that enough. And really do not infringe on that. Like treat that as a serious boundary.
Hmm.
Do not say yes to things if that it infringes on that. Like really, I've learned this lesson the hard way. And then again, like set up your rubric, like really identify what you truly like to do. It's really easy to say yes to something, because it feels good in the moment. But then when it gets onto the work, you just dread it. And it's like really taking a lot out of you. And also that might mean that you don't want to take on contract work. You only want to focus on your own projects for a while. Like that's okay too. Like you don't have to just like take on opportunities or freelance. There's lots of ways that you can structure your business. So I would say like really and I write these down, make checklists for yourself, write out your rubric, like have accountability for yourself and treat it really seriously. A lot of people will set deadlines for themselves, but then don't really honor that because it's like, well, it's only me. Like,
Hmm.
why, like, no one else really cares. But you have to care more than like other people do, honestly. Like, you have to treat those things as law. Once you set that as a boundary, you know yourself the best. Really honor that. Burnout is really devastating. It will disrupt your creative career because I don't want to liken it to depression. I do deal with depression, so I don't, say that lightly, but it really it's so hard to bounce back from that. I've dealt with that multiple times and it's really almost derailed the things that I've wanted to do. So plan ahead of that. Do not overcommit. Be really strict about what you say yes to. Everything you owe is to yourself first and foremost. So those would be kind of my 2 tips there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. And yeah, burnout is, I don't want to say it's easier to avoid than to recover from, but it kind of is,
It is. It kind of is. You just have to think about it. Yeah. And ask yourself honest questions and
Yeah.
be honest with yourself.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we do have a question that came in live from
Hmm.
Dylan Green. So Dylan asks us, how do we as a community work to make RPG writing more sustainable?
Mhm.
A lot of what has been talked about tonight is more individual, which it's
Yes.
kind of my fault for asking you individual questions, Ashley. But now if we look at it from a community perspective, are there things that we can do as a community
Mhm.
to try to make RPG writing and RPG adjacent
Yeah.
things more sustainable?
Yeah, this is a huge piece of this. And like, really, there's only so much that we can control as individuals. And I really think that these are systemic things that we need to address. So I fully 100% agree. And yeah. One thing is I think that when we can talk more transparently about pay, that's important because it allows
Mhm.
us to hold companies accountable for, pay that might not be equitable. Another thing I think is that we need to be partnering more with one another. We need to be doing like skills, swaps and job swaps and kind of pulling from our own communities for opportunities as much as possible, just to kind of give one another a leg up whenever we can. Unfortunately, like I don't know how much power I have against a big tabletop company, but there are ways to kind of vocalize our dissent if they are making changes or implementing things that are not really favorable to the creator community. I know a lot of people did that when the OGL things were coming up a couple years ago with 5e. And so I think we just have to be really, involved in our communities and we have to speak up when we see those instances of inequity. And I mean, a lot of this requires structural changes about how our economies are formed. Like, I think in this country, in the U.S., if we had, true universal health care, that would be a huge burden lifted off of people. Like, so much of how we have to structure creative careers in the U.S., it has to factor in how do I pay $1,000 a month for insurance, to cover my family. And I don't really have an answer to that specifically, but there's a lot of factors at play here. So I think just, being aware of those inequities on a societal level, like that all does ripple down into what we're all trying to do here. We're just trying to make it and do work that matters to us. So yeah, unfortunately, Dylan, like I agree with you. And I never want to suggest that like, oh, time management, like use the Pomodoro method will like fix these like industry-wide issues. But all we can really control is our time and our energy and our personal resources. So, and we have to kind of at this present moment build our sustainable careers with that in mind. But yeah, I don't know. I do want us to keep talking about these things because I think a lot of this does have to do with what are the jobs available on tabletop? Do those offer benefits to people? Are they allowing remote work so that people around the world can have access to these opportunities? Like access is a huge part of this. We didn't get to this question, but someone in the chat had asked about like, is it necessary to go to cons if you want to have a sustainable career, like to go to conventions? And personally, my gut reaction is heck no, because like that's a huge financial investment. That's not the only way you can network. Matt, like you mentioned, this server here is amazing for networking and finding opportunities. You do not necessarily have to kind of play the old school game to like, like to go to cons and like meet up with people at bars to like network. Like there's lots of ways to do that. Personally, I don't think that that's like a necessary part of this whatsoever. You can go because they're fun, but it's not, I don't think we should expect one another to go. And I think also we just need to give one another some grace as we're all learning how to do this. I think sometimes we hold one another to the same expectations as like a big corporation. And a lot of us, we're not working with millions of dollars here. We're all kind of doing the best we can. We're kind of learning in public, learning as we go. And so I think we just need to be patient with each other and to, offer support and help however we can. And then I hope to see some industry-wide changes, in the coming years. We have to be a part of that and we have to vocalize that. But I don't think it's something that won't happen either. So yeah, I wish I had more to say there. Yeah.
And it's definitely not something that can happen overnight. It's something that's going to take a while, and there are forces that are pushing the other way, right? So it's kind of learning what we can do, working together when we can, propping each other up when we can, and that's for now. Communicating to one another is as good as we can do, and talks like this hopefully help. So we've reached the end of our chat. I hope we covered as much as you all needed. I know there were a lot of questions that I don't think we got the chance to, but I think we hit the big ones. I think, Ashley, your answers covered really the important stuff. So thank you very much for being here, Ashley. Before we say our goodbyes, could you please let the listeners of today's chat know where they can find you, where they can sign up for courses with the Storytelling Collective and all of that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, you're more than welcome to join us at Storytelling Collective. We have free challenges throughout the year. We have an awesome catalog of tabletop courses, one of which is our Adventure Writers Academy, which is our ongoing mentorship program. So if you really want that ongoing help and support to build your sustainable tabletop career, like that would be the place to do it. Like that's something that we're all kind of working on together. And then you can find me at my website, which is scribemind.com. There's a contact form. Feel free to send me an email. I'm kind of on Twitter these days. I don't know. Don't love it. And I'm on Instagram at Scribemind Studio, which is just a way better place to like kind of connect with me. It's like the only platform I really like at this point. And then, yeah, I just definitely come and join us. We have a lot of courses and programming specifically about this topic and just like helping you just develop your skill set, your creative process. And a lot of folks in our community have gone on to build sustainable creative careers in tabletop. So we can all kind of help you get to and meet your goals. So yeah, definitely join us there.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I second that. Folks should definitely go check out the Storytelling Collective and follow Ashley wherever you use your social media. I know it's kind of a mess these days, but the one that you like, start there. And while you're at it, I'd encourage you to also give the TTRPG Rising Tide a follow on your social media platform of choice. And spread the good word. If you're a member of the Discord community, odds are the benefits of being here, but your friends who aren't, don't. So spread the word, let them know that we exist and that, we're here, we're a community that is by TTRPG creators for TTRPG creators. And I think on socials we're at TTRPG Rising Tide. So yeah, I'm Matt. I'm at roll_play_chat on most of the socials, some of which I am inactive in, but I'll leave that up to you to find out which ones. And today has been another RT Talks. I'm happy to have you all here. And if you want to join us for the next one, the next live event is here in the Discord community, taking place October 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be joined by Spencer Hibnick, and we're going to talk about playtesting. So that's going to be an interesting chat. So I hope to see everybody there. So thanks again, Ashley. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. And remember, folks, a rising tide lifts all boats. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.